an emphasis we put on multiplayer. But actually, it works out pretty well because since it's working as a multiplayer game, we could actually test it out. Because all you need is someone else to fill in for the enemy civilization, and you can test out how the rules work immediately without having to worry about whether there was an AI in place. It also, even though the game was sort of essentially turn-based, it was actually pretty much only functioned as a simultaneous move game at this point, which meant that we built it first as a real-time game and then layered turn-based rules on top of that. And the reason we did that was so that in multiplayer, players could move at the same time, without without the game screwing up. In multiplayer, the big issue in Civ is people having to wait for other people to move. So we determined that if we made the game multiplayer right off the bat and simultaneous movement right off the bat, that we can make sure that those features work really, really well, and it would be sort of trivial to turn a game that allows everyone to move at once into a game where it sort of only allows one person to move at a time. Going the other direction from a single player to multiplayer and from a turn-based to a simultaneous move game is much, much more difficult. We also implemented the team game right off the bat because we knew that was something that people would enjoy, especially in multiplayer, or multiplayer cooperatively, for example, like 2 or 3 people teaming up against the AI, or of course multiplayer competitively. We thought that would work really well in the Civ environment because you no longer have the issue of a 6-player free-for-all where one person starts doing really poorly and sort of wants to quit the game. Another person does really, really well, starts taking up all the time. Now a 6-player game, you have a 3-on-3 situation where people are first of all, they have the fun of working with each other, but then also it's very clear, like when the game has gotten out of hand, that you just declare victory and you start a new one. It doesn't drag on so as much. So at any rate, the big focus here was on the basics. The basic architecture of a Civ game, especially building it with an eye towards making multiplayer really work. If you actually look at the game, you see that we were aiming for a very natural terrain style. We didn't want the fact that it was a tile-based game to overwhelm the appearance of the game. The coastlines are natural. I mean, they also look kind of crappy, but you can see that we're not trying to bang you over the head with tiles, the rivers flow sort of naturally. The only thing that seems really strictly tile-based is where like the forests appear, for example. The interface, there's certain things we implement on the interface that we knew we sort of always wanted in a Civ game, like having visible yield symbols, where you can actually see how much food, production, and commerce is on the tile. Having multiple unit selection, where you can select multiple units at a time, like in an RTS game, and you can actually see that in the game, that you have a couple of units selected at a time. The progress bar concept, which we would use a number of places on the game to show how a city is growing, how fast it's building a unit, how fast you're researching technology, and also sort of your unit's hit points. That was something that once we had that technology, we sort of used it throughout the game in a number of places. So a big question that, and I've talked about this a little bit, is why did we focus on multiplayer first? And as I've talked about, it's just a lot easier to go from a multiplayer game to a single-player game, and from a simultaneous move game to a turn-based game. I sort of think of it as petting a cat, right? There's only really one way to do it. If you go the other direction, bad things are going to happen, and that's been the experience in some of the previous Civ versions. That we started as a very traditional single-player turn-based game, and then tried to turn it into a multiplayer, real-time, simultaneous move game, and that's always led to issues because we just don't know. You just don't necessarily know for sure that it's even going to work. When you make a single-player game, you don't have to be really careful about where the game is. The code can go into different loops and different sub areas, and it may not be looking for messages all the time. It may just be making changes to gameplay just wherever you want to. But if you want a really good, stable multiplayer game, you really need a system for how the game is going to function. You know, you need one loop where the game is always in. Everything that affects game data has to function through a messaging system, because everyone needs to know about it. You can't just change something on one person's machine and assume that the game is going to work. So if you focus on that from the very beginning, it's sort of trivial to turn that into a single-player game, because the game is always centered around sending messages. Messages about where you want to move a unit, what you want to build in a city, what you want to research. And then if it's multiplayer, you send those messages to everyone else. If it's single player, you still send the message, but you're basically just sending it to yourself. So, you know, even the single player game basically pretends like it's a multiplayer game. I mean, it's not important for the computer to know whether it actually needs to send messages to other computers or not. You know, it sort of becomes a trivial point. And the same holds true for, you know, sort of real-time versus turn-based. Whereas, you know, if the game is functioning in real time at all times, you know, everyone is moving whenever they need to, and one person can be changing what their city is producing, while another person changes what they research, while another person attacks the barbarians. You know, that all can happen at the same time. If you want to make that turn-based, all you do is just, you know, you just flip a switch on, you know, various different players to say, okay, you can move now, and now you can move, and now you can move, et cetera, et cetera. Another important thing is you can test features and balance the game without having an AI. You know, if I come up with a design idea, like if I think of, you know, great people, you know, I can implement that in a few days, and then we can test that immediately right away to see how it makes the game work. You know, if it wasn't multiplayer, I would really not know if that feature was balanced or not until there was an AI in the game. Another important thing about having multiplayer first is you get early team buy-in for design, because we're playing the game every week. You know, we would be constantly playing the game. You know, people would have fun, people wouldn't have fun, but they feel like they're invested in the game because it's not a mystery to them. You know, they're playing the game, and you know, multiplayer always has a certain amount of fun involved, because you know, people, you know, we're friends with the people we work with, so you know, we're always playing games together, and you know, we might as well be playing the games we work on. That makes people really much more invested in making the game fantastic.
It also helps people solve problems, because they know if their tree didn't read well in the game, or if the unit was hard to see, they were going to fix that. So the next time they played, they would be able to see it clearly.
The play sessions that we're sort of referring to here is we call it sort of, you know, fun testing, you know, which means which is important to separate from actual game testing, which is something you do at the very end of the project to make sure that there are no bugs, every button works, et cetera, et cetera. These were literally weekly play sessions where we picked a consistent day and time. For a while it was Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock, and then eventually it switched to Monday nights. But everyone knows when it is each day. Everyone knows when it is every single week, so they can sort of schedule around it if they want to come in. And you know, we'd have a different group of people every week, because people could sort of come and go, and that's fine. You know, you get different people's impressions of the game. It's important that a designer should basically always be there, because basically your weekly plan is going to be determined by what happens in that play session. You know, if there was, you know, when you see actual people playing a multiplayer game, multiplayer version of Civ 4, you can see immediately what's the most important thing you need to work on, because it's going to be the #1 thing they complain about. Basically, you know, it's whatever is the thing that sticks out to them that needs the most work.
It was always thrilling when playing the game that you'd see Soren walk around with a checklist of things that he needed to fix.
Having a testing pit helps, where everyone can do it in one place, so everyone in the company, when they walk by, they can see what's going on. You make sure you feed people, give them pizza, make them happy, but it does require a weekly release plan. So you have to spend some time making sure that, you know, the game is ready to play that Wednesday night. It's going to work. There aren't any bugs. People can have fun. The next version that we're looking at here is from December 2003. So at this point, we've been working on the project for about 6 months. So we're much further along as far as the gameplay is concerned. In fact, I would say that a lot of the features that people think of as sort of defining Civ 4 are in place at this point, even though we're a little less than 2 years from the game. There's now a single combat strength value, which was a big change from Civ 1 through 3, which had attack and defense, as well as modifiers. So your archers get a bonus defending a city, your axemen get a bonus against melee units, so on and so forth. Collateral damage is in place for artillery units.